you could times it by 10 in the Ryder Cup because you're not playing for yourself. This putt means a bunch to somebody else, and you're playing for him. And that's why the pressure's so intense.
It came down to the very last group on the very last green with a man named Bernard Langer. If he makes it, Europe wins. If he misses it, the United States wins.
I am James, and this is Golf Relived. They called it the darkest day in Ryder Cup history. And 35 years later, standing in June 2026, golf historians still use one phrase to describe what happened on that South Carolina coastline in September 1991. Out of control. What started as the world's most prestigious team golf event collapsed inside 72 hours into something the sport had never seen and has never fully recovered from. Golf spent over a century building a very specific image: quiet applause, firm handshakes, disputes settled with a nod and a gentleman's word. The Ryder Cup was supposed to be the crown jewel of all that, a friendly competition between America and Europe, rooted in mutual respect and played with dignity. Players were supposed to represent their countries with pride and their sport with honor. That was the promise. That was the code. And if you want more deep dives like this, use the height feature and give this video some hype. It takes 2 seconds and it genuinely helps the channel grow. Now here is the question that makes this story so disturbing. How does a game built on 100 years of gentlemanly tradition fall apart in 72 hours? The answer is not one bad actor. The answer is not one ugly moment. The answer is a system, a structure, a series of choices made by powerful people who were supposed to protect the code, and instead decided to burn it down for ratings, for nationalism, and for revenge. By the time the last putt was struck on that Sunday afternoon in 1991, golf would never be the same again. And what makes this story so haunting is that the collapse did not happen by accident. Every step of the way, someone in a position of authority chose the wrong path. Let us go back to the very beginning and follow that path, one ugly decision at a time. It starts on a Wednesday evening in Charleston. Before a single competitive shot had been hit on the ocean course, the PGA of America gathered both teams for a pre-tournament gala dinner. Speeches, formalities, and a film. A 15-minute highlight reel covering the history of the Ryder Cup was shown to the entire room. The European team sat down, expecting a balanced celebration of the event they had come to compete in. What they got was something else entirely. The film showed only American players, only American victories, only American shots. Decades of British, Irish, and continental European history were simply erased, wiped from the record, as if the other team had never existed. This was not a small oversight. This was deliberate, and the European contingent knew it immediately. Ken Schofield was the chief executive of the European tour at the time. He was so furious at what he was watching that he nearly stood up and walked straight out of the dinner. He stayed, but the damage was done. European captain Bernard Gallagher did not mince his words afterward. He called the film a total joke and highly unsporting. And remember, the context here made this erasure even more insulting. Europe had won the Ryder Cup in 1985. They won it again in 1987. They tied in 1989 and retained the trophy. The European team had spent years dismantling the American stranglehold on the competition, and the American establishment had just responded by pretending none of that had happened. Before the first tee shot of 1991 had been struck, there was already bad blood in the room. Real, deep, lasting bad blood. But the propaganda film was only the opening act. The atmosphere surrounding Kiowa Island in the autumn of 1991 was already supercharged with something far bigger than golf. The Persian Gulf War had ended just months earlier. The United States was riding a wave of red, white, and blue nationalism unlike anything the country had felt in a generation. Flags were everywhere. Pride was everywhere. And Captain Dave Stockton made a very deliberate choice. Rather than shielding his players from that political energy, he leaned into it. He welcomed it. He weaponized it. The American team posed for promotional posters with military styling. When players Corey Pavin and Steve Pate stepped onto the first tee on Friday morning, they were wearing camouflage-patterned golf caps. To the European team, this was not patriotism. This was provocation. Gallagher and his squad saw those caps and understood immediately that the week ahead was not going to be a friendly golf exhibition. It was going to be a battle. The political machinery went even higher than Stockton. President George H.W. Bush appeared in a pre-recorded television message shown during the opening ceremony, explicitly expressing his hope for an American victory. That had never happened before in the history of the Ryder Cup. A sitting American president taking sides in a golf match. Vice President Dan Quayle was physically present at the event, adding the weight of the United States government to what was supposed to be a sporting occasion. The effect on the galleries was immediate and total. When Seve Ballesteros and Jose Maria Olazabal were introduced on the first tee on Friday morning, the polite golf applause that had always defined the Ryder Cup simply did not happen. What replaced it was something journalists on the scene struggled to describe. One reporter compared it to a Scud missile detonating. The crowd had transformed overnight from a golf gallery into something closer to a football mob. Hostile, loud, personal. The fuse was lit. And then things got worse, in a way that had nothing to do with golf at all. The European players were staying in private villas on Kiowa Island. They expected the basic level of security and professional courtesy that any group of elite athletes deserves. What they got instead was a violation that still shocks people when they hear about it. Members of the villa housekeeping staff leaked the private room telephone numbers of the European players to a local Charleston radio disc jockey. The disc jockey then launched an on-air campaign. He called it Wake the Enemy. He read the private numbers out on the radio and encouraged his listeners to call those rooms at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. to disrupt the players' sleep before their matches. Thousands of people called, night after night. The phones in those villas rang in the early morning hours, while Seve Ballesteros and Nick Faldo and Bernhard Langer were trying to prepare their bodies and minds for the most intense competition of their professional lives. Gallagher went to the PGA of America officials and demanded that something be done. He was frantic. His players were being harassed in their beds in the middle of the night. The officials listened. They offered apologies. And then they did almost nothing. They treated the campaign as harmless fun, local color, hometown spirit. The message the European team received was clear. You are not guests here. You are enemies. And this entire island, every person on it, every system around you is pointed at breaking you. The golf course was the least of their problems. By the time Friday's play began, the tension had reached a level that made an explosion inevitable. And the explosion came during the Friday morning foursomes. Seve Ballesteros and Jose Maria Olazabal against Paul Azinger and Chip Beck. This match would produce one of the most infamous confrontations in Ryder Cup history. On the par 5 7th hole, Olazabal noticed something. The Americans had switched balls. They had been playing a 90 compression ball and had changed to a 100 compression ball. The reason was tactical. The fierce Atlantic wind coming off the ocean meant that a harder ball flew differently. By switching ball compression, depending on whether they were hitting with or against the wind, Azinger and Beck were trying to gain an advantage. The problem was that the one-ball rule had been established for the competition. Switching ball specifications mid-round was illegal. It was a clear violation. The Spanish pair made a careful decision. They did not raise the claim immediately. They waited and gathered proof. Then, on the 10th tee, they confronted the Americans directly. What followed was a 15-minute argument in front of the gallery, nose to nose, voices raised. The kind of scene golf had never seen on that stage before. Azinger and Beck eventually conceded that they had changed the ball, but claimed it was a mistake. Accidental, no intent to cheat. The rules officials considered the claim and came back with a ruling that enraged the European side. Because Ballesteros and Olazabal had not formally reported the violation to the match referee at the exact moment it occurred on the 7th hole, the officials could not issue a retroactive penalty. The Americans escaped on a technicality. The Spanish pair had followed what they believed was the right process, gathering evidence before making the accusation, and they were punished for it. Despite that injustice, the Spanish duo played magnificent golf. They rallied and won the match 2-1, but the personal damage was severe and permanent. After the round, Azinger went to the press and called Ballesteros the king of gamesmanship. He was not being complimentary. Seve responded with one of the most devastating lines in Ryder Cup history. The American team, he said, has 11 nice guys, and Paul Azinger. That quote spread across the sporting world instantly. The relationship between those two players was poisoned for years. The week continued to deteriorate. By Sunday morning, the matches were locked in a knife-edge tie. Everything was going to come down to the singles. And that is when the American captain made a move that would permanently end a professional relationship and leave a lasting stain on the tournament. Steve Pate was a rookie on the American team. On the Wednesday night before the tournament began, the team limousine was involved in a minor traffic accident on the way to the gala dinner in Charleston. Pate was in the car and suffered a bruised rib. Despite the injury, officials deemed him fit enough to compete, and Pate played in a Saturday afternoon 4-ball match. He lost. On Sunday morning, Stockton announced that Pate's ribs were too painful to allow him to play his scheduled singles match against Europe's David Guilford. Under Ryder Cup regulations, if a player withdraws on Sunday due to injury, the match is cancelled and the envelope system kicks in. Both teams automatically receive a half point without playing a single hole. The European locker room was furious. Guilford was a steady, reliable player. He was a heavy favorite to beat a struggling, injured Pate on a brutal, windswept course. By pulling Pate, Stockton was guaranteeing a half point that his team was very likely to lose if the match was actually played. There was also a gentleman's agreement in place. Captains were expected to consult one another before invoking the withdrawal rule. Stockton did not consult Gallagher. He did not even notify him. Gallagher found out the same way everyone else did. And Guilford, who had prepared his whole week for this moment, found out he would not play a single shot on Sunday. He was devastated. Gallagher viewed the entire maneuver as a calculated exploitation of a medical loophole. His professional relationship with Stockton ended that morning. It never recovered. With Guilford's match scratched, the pressure on every other Sunday singles match intensified to an almost unbearable level. The atmosphere on the course was unlike anything players had experienced. The galleries were deafening, the nationalism was raw, and the psychological weight was crushing everyone. One of the most heartbreaking moments of the entire week came from an American player. Mark Calcavecchia was playing Colin Montgomery in the singles. He built a stunning 4-up lead with only 4 holes left to play. That kind of lead is almost impossible to lose. But the toxic atmosphere of the war on the shore did not discriminate. It came for everyone, including the home team. Calcavecchia's swing began to desert him. The pressure got inside him and dismantled everything he had. On the par 3 17th hole, he hit his tee shot so far offline that the ball went directly into the ocean. He scrambled to salvage a half in the match. And then he walked off the course, past the television cameras, and disappeared into the sand dunes of Kiowa Island. He sat there alone, completely hidden, and he wept. This was a man who had just been crushed by the very atmosphere his own team had created. The war on the shore had claimed a victim from both sides. And then everything came down to the 18th green, Bernhard Langer versus Hale Irwin. The overall tournament score was tied. Everything would be decided right here, in this one match on this one hole. The golf gods could not have scripted a more dramatic conclusion, but drama at Kiowa in 1991 was never clean. It was never simple, and the final hole of the final match of the war on the shore would be no different. Irwin stood on the 18th tee under enormous pressure and hit a wild, snap-hooked drive. The ball dove left, deep into the dense crowd gathered in the dunes. It vanished from view in the mass of people. During the chaos that followed, the ball struck a young PGA of America official named Kathy Jordan in the small of her back, leaving a visible welt. A ball hit hard off the tee of a professional golfer hit a real person and hurt her. That is how chaotic this moment was. And then something strange happened. The ball, which had landed deep in the rough of the dunes, somehow ended up sitting in the fairway in a clean lie. The American television broadcast said it was a lucky bounce. A European supporter watching the scene said something very different. That witness claimed to have seen a spectator physically pick up Irwin's ball from the deep rough and throw it back into the fairway. That allegation has never been proven. It has never been disproven. It is one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries in the history of the sport. Despite his fortunate lie, Irwin played a poor second shot and made a bogey on the 18th hole. That left Langer standing over a 6-foot par putt. Make it, and the match is tied. A tied match meant the Ryder Cup overall score would finish 14-14, and a 14-14 tie meant Europe retained the trophy as the defending champion. Everything rested on one putt from 6 feet. Langer was standing in hell. The crowd was screaming. The gallery was doing everything it could to distract him, cheering when Irwin made his bogey, howling as Langer settled over his ball. There was no silence. There was no respect. There was nothing but noise and chaos surrounding a man trying to perform one of the most delicate athletic actions in sport. And Langer was doing it with information he did not have. Before the tournament, Irwin had played a practice round with Pete Dye, the legendary architect who designed the ocean course. Dye had quietly shared a secret with Irwin. The 18th green, Dye told him, broke significantly more from back to front than it appeared to the naked eye. It was a subtle characteristic, easy to miss, but on a crucial putt, a vital piece of hidden knowledge. Irwin had this information. Langer did not. Langer read the putt as best he could, committed to his line, and struck it cleanly. The ball rolled toward the cup, grazed the right edge, and spun out. it missed. Europe lost the Ryder Cup 14.5 to 13.5. The reaction was immediate and unforgettable. American players swarmed the 18th green. Champagne appeared. The celebration was raucous, unrestrained, and complete. And at the center of it all, Bernhard Langer stood in silent, dignified heartbreak, while the winning team celebrated around him as if he was not there. Traditionalists watching that scene felt something die. The code of the game, the idea that you acknowledge your opponent's pain before your own joy, that you find some moment of shared humanity, even in a rivalry, was gone. The war on the shore had taken it. The question that golf's traditionalists have been sitting with for 35 years is a quiet and painful one. If Bernhard Langer's putt had dropped on that October afternoon, would the sport have found the courage to pull back from the edge? Would that final, poetic moment of European redemption have been enough to make the establishment say, enough, we went too far, the code matters? Or was it always going to go this way? Was the code always destined to be sacrificed the moment someone discovered that abandoning it was profitable? There is no answer. There is only the image of Langer standing on the 18th green, dignified and still, while the noise swirled around him. And the knowledge that somewhere in that image is a lesson the sport learned too late, that the things that make a game worth playing are also the things most worth protecting. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the propaganda film, the phone calls, or that final putt? Subscribe to Golf Relived for more.